The Rio Sangre twisted like a silver knife through the canyon, its banks glowing red under the dying sun. The land was quiet, too quiet for a place that usually sang with the chatter of birds and the restless groan of cattle. That silence was what first made Jesse Cole tighten his grip on the reins. A silence like that meant something was wrong. He was only 19. Lean from months of riding herd, his skin burned to leather by the desert winds. Folks called him Boy in town. Too green to be trusted with more than fence posts and water runs. But tonight, with his Winchester tied to the saddle and the Colt heavy at his hip, Jesse felt older. He had ridden 3 days straight, driving a dozen strays back to the Red Mesa Trail. And all he wanted was to water his horse before making camp. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought she was just another shadow along the riverbank. But when she staggered forward, the setting sun caught her face. A girl, not much younger than him, dark braids matted with dust, a torn doe-skin dress clinging to her thin frame. Blood streaked down her leg where an arrow had grazed her. She was trying to cross the river, each step pulling her deeper into the current. Jesse froze. Apache. Every story told around campfires came crashing back at once. Raids, scalping knives, cattle stolen in the night. His pa used to say, "If you see one Apache, there are 50 more behind her." But this girl wasn't holding a weapon. Her arms flailed weakly, her lips moving in words the river carried away. She was drowning, plain and simple. His horse stamped nervously as if sensing the weight of the decision. Walk away, and he'd be safe. Walk away, and no one would ever know. But Jesse dug his spurs in. The gelding leapt into the shallows, water splashing high around them. He grabbed the girl by the arm just as her knees buckled, yanking her onto the saddle. She was lighter than she looked, bones and nothing more. Her head lolled against his chest, and for a moment he thought she was dead. Then he felt it, the faint rise and fall of her breath. "Easy now," he muttered, though she couldn't understand him. "You're safe." Safe. He almost laughed at the word. Nothing about this was safe. He carried her to a patch of dry ground beneath a cottonwood tree. She coughed hard, water spilling from her mouth, then whispered something in Apache. Soft, broken, but full of urgency. Jesse didn't understand the words, but he understood the plea in her eyes. Her gaze locked on his, fierce despite her weakness. Brown eyes like dark firelight, accusing and desperate all at once. Jesse felt his stomach twist. He'd never looked this close at an Apache before. She wasn't the monster his pa had described. She was just a girl, terrified and bleeding. He was looking for her. The sky was deepening into purple, stars pricking through. Jesse led his horse back to the tree, where the girl lay wrapped in his blanket, shivering though the air was warm. She watched him silently, lips parted, as though she wanted to speak but didn't know the words. "Rest," Jesse said softly, settling a fire between them. "Tomorrow, I'll figure this out." But deep down, he knew tomorrow would bring more than answers. It would bring riders, maybe Apaches who thought he had stolen their daughter, maybe ranchers who'd see him harboring the enemy. Either way, Jesse Cole had crossed a line no one in Red Mesa dared to cross. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the dark. The girl whispered again, this time a single word repeated twice, her voice trembling with both fear and warning. The war drums grew louder as the night deepened. Each beat echoed against the canyon walls, rolling through Jesse's chest like the heartbeat of something ancient and unstoppable. His horse stamped nervously, ears twitching toward the sound. The girl stirred by the fire, her eyes wide and alert now, no longer dazed with pain. She sat up despite the wound in her leg, whispering quick words in Apache, pointing toward the east. Her voice was low but sharp, like a knife cutting through the silence. Jesse shook his head. "I don't understand you." She pointed again, more forceful this time, then drew her hand across her throat in a gesture that made Jesse's blood run cold. Death was coming. Jesse's first instinct was to saddle up and ride hard into the night, leave her behind and pray the drums weren't meant for him. But when he looked at her, this girl, clinging to life by sheer willpower, her gaze steady despite the fear, he knew he couldn't. Something in him refused to abandon her, even if it meant his own neck on a rope. He doused the fire with a bootful of sand. The night swallowed them instantly, leaving only the pale shimmer of starlight. "We move," he said, even though she couldn't understand. He lifted her carefully into the saddle, her small hands clutching the pommel, then swung up behind her. The gelding shivered under the weight of two, but Jesse leaned close, whispering reassurance into its ear before nudging it toward the north trail. The drums followed. For an hour they rode through scrub and shadow, Jesse's eyes darting to every ridge. Coyotes yipped in the distance, masking the sound of distant hoofbeats. He could feel it, though. Someone was tracking them. The girl whispered again, a name this time. "Nita," she said, touching her chest. Jesse blinked. "Nita." She nodded, eyes glinting in the starlight. Then she pointed at him. "Jesse," he said quietly. She repeated it carefully, her accent rough on the edges but soft in its effort. Despite the fear pounding in his chest, something warm flickered in him. A fragile bridge had been built between them, just a name each, but it was more than silence. They reached a narrow draw, a cleft between two cliffs where the shadows deepened. Jesse slid down and guided the horse inside, keeping low. Nita winced as he helped her down, her wounded leg buckling beneath her. He caught her before she fell, his hands burning where they touched her skin. She steadied herself against the canyon wall, her breath sharp with pain. Then her eyes widened suddenly, and she pressed a trembling finger to his lips. Hoofbeats. Close. Jesse crouched low, pulling Nita down beside him. The sound of horses filled the night, cradled like extensions of their arms. Apache warriors. Nita's people. Jesse's chest tightened. If they saw him with her, there'd be no explaining. To them, he would be a kidnapper, maybe worse. And yet, when he glanced at her, she didn't look afraid. She looked relieved. One of the warriors dismounted, scanning the ground. His gaze passed so close, Jesse swore the man could hear his heartbeat. The warrior bent, touching the sand where Jesse's horse had left fresh prints. He barked something in Apache, and the others tightened their circle. Nita whispered urgently, her words rushing like a river. She pointed to herself, then toward the warriors, then back to Jesse. Her eyes pleaded with him. "Trust me." Before Jesse could stop her, she rose to her feet. "Nita!" he hissed, grabbing for her arm, but she shook him off with surprising strength. She limped forward into the moonlight, calling out in her language. The reaction was immediate. The warriors froze. Then a ripple of recognition moved through them, like wind over tall grass. Several dismounted at once, rushing toward her. Voices filled the canyon, sharp and overlapping. Jesse stayed in the shadows, his hand on his Colt, unsure if he was about to live or die. One of the warriors reached her first, a tall man with a wolf pelt draped over his shoulders. He touched her face gently, then spoke a word that made the others murmur in awe. Nita answered, her voice breaking but strong enough to carry. She pointed back toward the shadows where Jesse crouched. Every head turned. The canyon went silent. Jesse rose slowly, hands open, showing he meant no harm. His Colt weighed heavy at his hip, but he didn't draw. He met their eyes one by one, standing as tall as his 19 years allowed. The tall warrior studied him for a long, terrible moment. Then, without a word, he lifted his hand and signaled. Half the warriors raised their rifles. Nita cried out, limping between Jesse and the line of guns, shouting in Apache, her arms spread wide as if to shield him with her own body. The night held its breath. Jesse's pulse hammered so loud he could barely hear. This was it, the moment he would pay for a choice made by a riverbank. But instead of a gunshot, a new sound cut through the canyon. The slow, deliberate clap of hooves. From the shadows, beyond the warriors emerged another rider. Older, broader, his face painted with lines of authority. His presence silenced even the drums. The chief had arrived. And by the way Nita fell to her knees in front of him, Jesse knew this was more than just a rescue. This was judgment. The old chief sat tall upon his painted horse, his presence heavy as the canyon walls themselves. Even without understanding the language, Jesse felt the weight of command in every line of the man's face. Etched deep by wind, war, and years of decisions no one else dared to make. Nita knelt before him, her head bowed, speaking rapidly in Apache. Her voice trembled, but carried the strength of someone clinging to hope. The warriors murmured, shifting uneasily. Some looked at Jesse with open hatred, others with suspicion, none with trust. Jesse swallowed hard. His hands stayed open, palms forward, though the urge to reach for his Colt gnawed at him like a starving dog. If they fired, he'd never get a shot off. But he stood his ground. Running now would only prove him guilty of whatever they thought he'd done. The chief dismounted slowly. The canyon seemed to bow with him. He placed a weathered hand on Nita's shoulder, listening as she spoke, then turned his gaze upon Jesse. Those eyes, dark, steady, unreadable, pinned Jesse in place. The chief spoke in Apache first, his tone low and deliberate. Then, switching to broken English, he asked a single question. "You touch her?" Jesse's chest tightened. He shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I found her. Wounded. She was drowning. I pulled her from the river, that's all." The words sounded weak, even to his own ears. Who here would believe the word of a white boy over the suspicions of hardened warriors? But Nita rose, limping forward. She clutched the chief's arm, speaking fiercely, pointing to Jesse, then to the river beyond. Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with conviction. The chief listened in silence, then raised a hand. The warriors lowered their rifles, though reluctantly. The echo of their decision lingered in the canyon like thunder that refused to roll away. Then the chief stepped closer. Jesse smelled the smoke in his hair, the rawhide and sweat of a man born to the saddle. "You risk," the chief said finally. "Why?" Jesse hesitated. He thought of lying, of claiming he hadn't meant to, that it was chance. But, looking into those ancient eyes, he knew lies would shrivel. "Because leaving her there would have been wrong," Jesse said. His voice shook, but he forced the words out steady. "She would have died, and I couldn't ride away from that. Not and call myself a man." The canyon held its breath. The chief studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He barked something in Apache, and the warriors eased back, though the hostility in their eyes never faded. Nita touched Jesse's arm lightly, her voice soft but urgent. "Takoda," she said, gesturing to the chief. "My father." Jesse's blood chilled. Her father, which meant the man staring at him like a wolf measuring prey, was not just any leader, but the now stood under his judgment. Takoda spoke again in Apache, longer this time, his voice rising and falling like the rhythm of the drums. The warriors responded with shouts of agreement, though some argued, their gestures sharp with anger. Finally, the chief raised his hand, silencing them. His eyes locked on Jesse. "You ride with us," Takoda said. Jesse blinked. What? The chief pointed north, where the canyon opened toward the high mesas. War comes. You see. You ride. With us. It wasn't a request. Before Jesse could answer, the sound of new hoofbeats thundered from the south. Horses, many of them, moving fast. Torchlight flared against the canyon walls. Not Apache. The soldiers had come. Shouts echoed in English now, harsh and commanding. "Fan out! They're here somewhere!" Rifles cocked. Boots hit the ground. The warriors shifted instantly into formation, their movements practiced, fluid, like a single living thing preparing to strike. Nita gripped Jesse's sleeve, eyes wide with fear. Takoda's face hardened into stone. "Choice now, cowboy. You ride with us, or you die with them." Jesse's heart pounded. The night burned with firelight, the drums of war drowned by the clatter of iron and the curses of soldiers closing in. And for the first time, Jesse realized this wasn't just about a girl pulled from the river. This was about choosing a side in a war that would leave no room for mercy. The canyon exploded with noise. Soldiers poured in from the south, their torches burning like false suns, their rifles glinting in the dark. Shouts in English cut through the steady drumbeat of Apache war cries. The air itself felt split in two, torn between worlds that could never live side by side. Jesse's pulse hammered so hard he thought his chest might burst. He stood frozen, caught between two lines of death, Apache warriors tightening their circle around Takoda and Nita, and soldiers advancing with bayonets fixed. "Choice now, cowboy!" Takoda repeated, his voice like stone breaking. Nita clutched Jesse's arm, her face pale but fierce. "Please," she whispered, though he could hardly hear her over the chaos. Jesse's legs trembled, but something inside him steadied. He had no future with the soldiers. If they saw him beside Nita, he'd hang as a traitor before dawn. Whatever chance he had lay with the people who should have killed him already, but hadn't. He turned toward Takoda and gave a sharp nod. "I ride with you." The chief's eyes flickered, neither approval nor relief, just acknowledgement. He barked a command. In an instant, Apache riders wheeled their ponies into formation. One warrior hauled Jesse onto the back of a spare horse, its hide slick with sweat. Nita was lifted beside her father, clinging to the saddle horn with white knuckles. Then the world became fire. Shots cracked through the night. Sparks flew from canyon walls. A soldier screamed, then another. The Apaches loosed arrows from the shadows, each shaft finding its mark with deadly precision. Jesse ducked low, clinging to the mane as bullets sang overhead. The warband surged northward, a living storm of hooves and dust. Jesse had ridden hard cattle drives before, but nothing like this. These men moved like wind and shadow, their horses weaving through the narrow trails as though guided by the land itself. Behind them, soldiers cursed and gave chase. Torches bobbed like a river of fire. Gunshots echoed, flashes of powder splitting the dark. The canyon narrowed, forcing the riders into single file. Jesse's breath came ragged, his thighs burning with the effort to stay astride. Beside him, a warrior glanced back and spat. "White boy fall soon," he muttered in accented English. Jesse grit his teeth. Not tonight. They burst from the canyon onto open mesa. The moon lit the land in silver, stretching shadows for miles. Takoda raised his hand, and the riders spread out like hawks breaking formation. Jesse followed clumsily, his horse stumbling under his inexperience, but he kept his seat. At the far edge of the mesa, the Apaches veered sharply into a hidden ravine. Soldiers behind, less familiar with the terrain, overshot the turn. Jesse glanced back just long enough to see torches scatter, riders colliding in confusion. The Apaches' laughter cut through the night like flint on steel. But the chase wasn't over. Shots still cracked, ricocheting off stone. One bullet tore past Jesse's ear, close enough to sting. He ducked low again, heart hammering. Finally, after what felt like hours, the riders slowed. The ravine opened into a sheltered basin hidden from view. A fire was kindled quickly. Smoke kept low. Warriors dismounted, their movements efficient and practiced. Jesse slid off his horse, legs buckling beneath him. He caught himself against a rock, chest heaving. Every muscle screamed. Every nerve sang with the memory of gunfire. Nita limped toward him, supported by a younger warrior. Her hair had come loose, strands whipping across her face. Despite the exhaustion written in every line of her body, she managed a faint smile. "You stayed," she whispered. Jesse nodded, though words failed him. He wanted to tell her he had no choice, that fate had tied him to her the moment he pulled her from the river. But all he managed was a hoarse, "yeah." Takoda stood over them, arms folded. His presence silenced the camp as surely as any command. He spoke in Apache first, voice carrying across the basin, then switched to English for Jesse's sake. "You ride with us," he said again, this time not as a demand but as a fact. "You fight with us. You bleed with us." Jesse met his gaze. "And if I refuse?" Takoda's eyes narrowed. "Then you die when the sun rises. Soldiers hunt you. My men hate you. Only reason you breathe now is my daughter." The words landed like stones. Jesse looked at Nita, who lowered her gaze, ashamed of the burden she had placed upon him. Yet when she looked up again, her eyes held something else too: trust. The camp settled. Horses watered, wounds dressed, weapons checked. Jesse sat apart, staring at the fire, trying to steady his shaking hands. He thought of Red Mesa, of the ranch hands who'd call him a fool, of the noose waiting if he ever returned. He thought of Nita's face when she said his name, and he realized the line he had crossed was gone forever. Far above, the stars blazed cold and unblinking. Somewhere beyond the horizon, soldiers were regrouping, planning their next strike. War would come with the dawn. Takoda rose once more, lifting his spear to the sky. His voice thundered across the camp, echoing off stone. The warriors pounded their chests, answering as one. Nita sat beside Jesse, her shoulder brushing his. Her whisper was barely audible over the war cries. "Tomorrow, Jesse, tomorrow is blood." The first light of dawn spilled across the basin, painting the cliffs in shades of red like open wounds. Jesse hadn't slept. None of them had. The Apache camp buzzed with tense energy, horses saddled, weapons checked, faces painted with lines of war. Takoda stood before his people, a living monument against the pale sky. His voice rolled like thunder in their native tongue. Words Jesse couldn't understand, but felt deep in his bones. Every cheer, every pounding fist against a chest, told him the same thing. They would fight to the death, if they must. Nita sat near Jesse, her leg freshly bound, her eyes shadowed but unwavering. She reached for his hand. He hesitated, then let her fingers slip into his. They were cold but strong. "You don't have to stay," she whispered, her English halting but clear. Jesse looked at her, at the courage in her eyes, despite the fear quivering at the edges. "Yes, I do," he said. "The moment I pulled you from that river, my life stopped being mine alone." Her eyes glistened, and for a fleeting second, the war faded, leaving only two young souls caught in something bigger than either of them could carry. A horn blast shattered the stillness. From the ridge above, dust plumed into the air. Soldiers, dozens of them, advancing in tight formation, rifles glinting in the morning sun. Their commander's voice echoed, "Advance! No one leaves this canyon alive!" The Apache warriors rose as one. Takoda mounted, his spear raised high. He shouted a command that sent the warband surging forward, their cries piercing the dawn. Jesse found himself shoved toward a horse. A warrior thrust a bow into his hands. "Fight or die," the man growled. His fingers trembled, unfamiliar with the weapon, but he nodded. He had no illusions. He wasn't here as a warrior, not really. He was here as a choice, a symbol of a line crossed, of a heart tethered to a girl he barely knew but could not abandon. The clash was thunder, gunfire split the air, arrows whistled, screams rose in a brutal chorus, the basin filled with smoke and dust, the acrid sting of powder choking the air. Jesse loosed an arrow clumsily. It flew wild, but the act alone branded him among them. Nita huddled near the rocks, clutching a dagger, her face fierce despite her wound. Jesse's heart lurched every time gunfire sparked near her. He fought not with skill, but with desperation, dragging a wounded warrior to cover, throwing rocks when arrows ran short. Through the chaos, Takoda was everywhere, his spear flashing like lightning, his voice a rallying storm. Soldiers fell beneath his fury, but the numbers pressed in. The Apache line wavered. Then Jesse saw him, the commander, a scarred man on a chestnut horse, barking orders, driving his men forward. His rifle lifted, aimed squarely at Takoda's back.
Feet. He had fired a gun his whole life, but never at men. His hand shook, his vision blurred with dust and terror. Yet when he pulled the trigger, the shot rang true. The commander toppled backward, his rifle slipping from dead fingers. Silence rippled, brief but shattering. The soldiers faltered, their leader gone. The Apaches roared, surging with renewed fury, driving the soldiers back toward the ridge. The basin shook with the retreat, hoofbeats pounding like thunder fading into distance. When the dust finally settled, bodies littered the earth, blue coats and feathers alike. The cost of survival lay heavy in the still air. Jesse dropped the rifle, his chest heaving. He turned to see Nita staring at him, wide-eyed, her face streaked with ash and tears. She limped forward, placing her hands against his chest. "You fight for us," she whispered. Jesse nodded, but his throat ached too much for words. He hadn't fought for glory or for land or for honor. He had fought for her. Takoda approached, his face grim, but his eyes glinting with something Jesse couldn't name. Respect, maybe. Or warning. "You kill your own," the chief said slowly in English. Jesse swallowed. "I killed a man who would have killed you, that's all." Takoda studied him, then turned away. "War not end, never end. You choose today. Tomorrow, another choice." The words sank deep. Jesse looked at Nita, who still clutched his hand like an anchor in a storm. Around them, the wounded groaned, the dead lay silent, and the sky burned with the promise of more blood yet to come. He realized then what Takoda meant. This wasn't a single choice by a river. It was a lifetime of choices, each one demanding more than the last. Nita's fingers tightened around his. Her eyes met his with quiet defiance, as though daring the world to tear them apart. And Jesse, 19 years old and branded now by blood and fire, understood the truth of his curse and his salvation. Their love would survive, if it survived at all. Not in peace, but in the space between battles. The war drums would beat again. The soldiers would return. But for this moment, under the rising sun, Jesse held her hand and let himself believe. If only for a moment.